Sumeria. Orientation. Contributions of the Near East to Western civilization. Written history is at least 6,000 years old. During half of this period, the center of human affairs, so far as they are now known to us, was in the Near East. By this vague term, we shall mean here all southwestern Asia south of Russia and the Black Sea, and west of India and Afghanistan. Still more loosely, we shall include within it Egypt, too, as anciently bound up with the Near East in one vast web and communicating complex of Oriental civilization. In this rough theater of teeming peoples and conflicting cultures were developed the agriculture and commerce, the horse and wagon, the coinage and letters of credit, the crafts and industries, the law and government, the mathematics and medicine, the enemas and drainage systems, the geometry and astronomy, the calendar and zodiac and clock, the alphabet and writing, the paper and ink, the books and schools and libraries, the literature and music, the sculpture and architecture, the glazed pottery and fine furniture, monotheism and monogamy, the cosmetics and jewelry, the dice and checkers, the 10 pins and income tax, the wet nurses and beer, from which our own European and American culture derive by a continuous succession through the mediation of Crete and Greece and Rome. The Aryans did not establish civilization. They took it from Babylonia and Egypt. Greece did not begin civilization. It inherited far more civilization than it began. It was the spoiled heir of 3 millenniums of arts and sciences brought to its cities from the Near East by the fortunes of trade and war. In studying and honoring the Near East, we shall be acknowledging a debt long due to the real founders of European and American civilization. 1. Elam. The culture of Susa, the potter's wheel, the wagon wheel. If the reader will look at a map of Persia and will run his finger north along the Tigris from the Persian Gulf to Amara, and then east across the Iraq border to the modern town of Shusan, he will have located the site of the ancient city of Susa, center of a region known to the Jews as Elam, the highland. In this narrow territory, protected on the west by marshes, and on the east by the mountains that shoulder the great Iranian plateau, a people of unknown race and origin developed one of the first historic civilizations. Here, a generation ago, French archaeologists found human remains dating back 20,000 years in evidences of an advanced culture as old as 4,500 BC. Professor Breasted believes, however, that the antiquity of this culture and that of an owl has been exaggerated by De Morgan, Pompelli, and other students. Apparently, the Elamites had recently emerged from a nomad life of hunting and fishing, but already they had copper weapons and tools, cultivated grains and domesticated animals, hieroglyphic writing and business documents, jewelry and mirrors, and a trade that reached from Egypt to India. In the midst of chipped flints that bring us back to the Neolithic age, we find finished vases, elegantly rounded and delicately painted with geometric designs, or with picturesque representations of animals and plants. Some of this pottery is ranked among the finest ever made by man. And here is the oldest appearance not only of the potter's wheel, but of the wagon wheel. This modest but vital vehicle of civilization is found only later in Babylonia and still later in Egypt. From these already complex beginnings, the Elamites rose to troubled power, conquering Sumeria and Babylon, and being conquered by them, turn by turn. The city of Susa survived 6,000 years of history, lived through the imperial zeniths of Sumeria, Babylonia, Egypt, Assyria, Persia, Greece, and Rome, and flourished under the name of Shushan as late as the 14th century of our era. At various times, it grew to great wealth. When Ashurbanipal captured and sacked it, 646 BC, his historians recounted, without understatement, the varied booty of gold and silver, precious stones and royal ornaments, costly garments and regal furniture, cosmetics and chariots, which the conqueror brought in his train to Nineveh. History so soon began its tragic alternance of art and war. The Sumerians. The historical background. The exhuming of Sumeria. Geography. Race. Appearance. The Sumerian flood. The kings. An ancient reformer. Sargon of Akkad. The golden age of Ur. If we return to our map and follow the combined Tigris and Euphrates from the Persian Gulf to where these historic streams diverge at modern Kurna, and then follow the Euphrates westward, we shall find north and south of it the buried cities of ancient Sumeria. Eridu, now Abu Sharain. Ur, now Mukayyar. Uruk, biblical Erech, now Warka. Larsa, biblical Elasar, now Senkhera. Lagash, now Shipurla. Nippur, Niffer, and Nisan. Follow the Euphrates northwest to Babylon, once the most famous city of Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Observe, directly east of it, Kish, site of the oldest culture known in this region. Then pass some 60 miles farther up the Euphrates to Agad, capital in ancient days of the kingdom of Akkad. The early history of Mesopotamia is in one aspect the struggle of the non-Semitic peoples of Sumeria to preserve their independence against the inroads and expansion of the Semites from Kish and Agad and other centers in the north. In the midst of their struggles, these varied stocks unconsciously, perhaps unwillingly, cooperated to produce the first extensive civilization known to history, and one of the most creative and unique. The unearthing of this forgotten culture is one of the romances of archaeology. To those whom, with a poor sense of the amplitude of time, we call the ancients, that is, to the Romans, the Greeks, and the Jews, Sumeria was unknown. Herodotus apparently never heard of it. If he did, he ignored it, as something more ancient to him than he to us. Berosus, a Babylonian historian writing about 250 BC, knew of Sumeria only through the veil of a legend. He described a race of monsters, led by one Oannes, coming out of the Persian Gulf and introducing the arts of agriculture, metalworking, and writing. All the things that make for the amelioration of life, he declares, were bequeathed to men by Oannes, and since that time no further inventions have been made. Not till 2,000 years after Berosus was Sumeria rediscovered. In 1850, Hincks recognized that cuneiform writing made by pressing a wedge-pointed stylus upon soft clay, and used in the Semitic languages of the Near East, had been borrowed from an earlier people with a largely non-Semitic speech. And Opare gave to this hypothetical people the name Sumerian. About the same time, Rawlinson and his aides found, among Babylonian ruins, tablets containing vocabularies of this ancient language, with interlinear translations, in modern college style, from the older language into Babylonian. In 1854, 2 Englishmen uncovered the sites of Eridu, Ur, and Uruk. At the end of the 19th century, French explorers revealed the remains of Lagash, including tablets recording the history of the Sumerian kings. And in our time, Professor Woolley of the University of Pennsylvania and many others have exhumed the primeval city of Ur, where the Sumerians appear to have reached civilization by 4500 BC. So, the students of many nations have worked together on this chapter of that endless mystery story in which the detectives are archaeologists and the prey is historic truth. Nevertheless, there has been as yet only a beginning of research in Sumeria. There is no telling what vistas of civilization and history will be opened up when the ground has been worked and the material studied, as men have worked and studied in Egypt during the last 100 years. Despite much research, we cannot tell of what race the Sumerians were, nor by what route they entered Sumeria. Perhaps they came from Central Asia, or the Caucasus, or Armenia, and moved through northern Mesopotamia down the Euphrates and the Tigris, along which, as at Ashur, evidences of their earliest culture have been found. Perhaps, as the legend says, they sailed in from the Persian Gulf, from Egypt or elsewhere, and slowly made their way up those great rivers. Perhaps they came from Susa, among whose relics is an asphalt head bearing all the characteristics of the Sumerian type. Perhaps even they were of remote Mongolian origin, for there is much in their language that resembles the Mongol speech. We do not know. The remains show them as a short and stocky people with high, straight, non-Semitic nose, slightly receding forehead, and downward sloping eyes. Many wore beards. Some were clean-shaven. Most of them shaved the upper lip. They clothed themselves in fleece, in finely woven wool. The women draped the garment from the left shoulder. The men bound it at the waist, and left the upper half of the body bare. Later, the male dress crept up towards the neck, with the advance of civilization, but servants, male and female, while indoors, continued to go naked from head to waist. The head was usually covered with a cap, and the feet were shod with sandals. But well-to-do women had shoes of soft leather, heelless, and laced like our own. Bracelets, necklaces, anklets, finger rings, and earrings made the women of Sumeria, as, recently in America, show windows of their husbands' prosperity. When their civilization was already old, about 2300 BC, the poets and scholars of Sumeria tried to reconstruct its ancient history. The poets wrote legends of a creation, a primitive paradise, and a terrible flood that engulfed and destroyed it because of the sin of an ancient king. This flood passed down into Babylonian and Hebrew tradition and became part of the Christian creed. In 1929, Professor Woolley, digging into the ruins of Ur, discovered at considerable depth an 8-foot layer of silt and clay. This, if we are to believe him, was deposited during a catastrophic overflow of the Euphrates, which lingered in later memory as the flood. Beneath that layer were the remains of a pre-Diluvian culture that would later be pictured by the poets as a golden age. Meanwhile, the priest historians sought to create a past spacious enough for the development of all the marvels of Sumerian civilization. They formulated lists of their ancient kings, extending the dynasties before the flood to 432,000 years, and told such impressive stories of two of these rulers, Tammuz and Gilgamesh, that the latter became the hero of the greatest poem in Babylonian literature, and Tammuz passed down into the pantheon of Babylon and became the Adonis of the Greeks. Perhaps the priests exaggerated a little the antiquity of their civilization. We may vaguely judge the age of Sumerian culture by observing that the ruins of Nippur are found to a depth of 66 feet, of which almost as many feet extend below the remains of Sargon of Akkad as rise above it to the topmost stratum. On this basis, Nippur would go back to 5262 BC. Tenacious dynasties of city kings seem to have flourished at Kish, circa 4500 BC, and at Ur, circa 3500 BC. In the competition of these two primeval centers, we have the first form of that opposition between Semite and non-Semite, which was to be one bloody theme of Near Eastern history from the Semitic ascendancy of Kish and the conquests of the Semitic kings Sargon I and Hammurabi through the capture of Babylon by the Aryan generals Cyrus and Alexander in the 6th and 4th centuries before Christ, and the conflicts of Crusaders and Saracens for the Holy Sepulchre and the emoluments of trade, down to the efforts of the British government to dominate and pacify the divided Semites of the Near East today. From 3000 BC onward, the clay tablet records kept by the priests and found in the ruins of Ur present a reasonably accurate account of the accessions and coronations, uninterrupted victories, and sublime deaths of the petty kings who ruled the city-states of Ur, Uruk, Lagash, and the rest. The writing of history and the partiality of historians are very ancient things. One king, Urukagina of Lagash, was a royal reformer, an enlightened despot who issued decrees aimed at the exploitation of the poor by the rich and of everybody by the priests. The high priest, says one edict, must no longer come into the garden of a poor mother and take wood therefrom, nor gather tax in fruit therefrom. Burial fees were to be cut to 1/5 of what they had been, and the clergy and high officials were forbidden to share among themselves the revenues and cattle offered to the gods. It was the king's boast that he gave liberty to his people. And surely the tablets that preserve his decrees reveal to us the oldest, briefest, and justest code of laws in history. This lucid interval was ended, normally, by one Lugal Zagisi, who invaded Lagash, overthrew Urukagina, and sacked the city at the height of its prosperity. The temples were destroyed, the citizens were massacred in the streets, and the statues of the gods were led away in ignominious bondage. One of the earliest poems in existence is a clay tablet, apparently 4,800 years old, on which the Sumerian poet Din-Jaradama mourns for the raped goddess of Lagash. For the city, alas, the treasures my soul doth sigh. For my city Girsu, alas, the treasures, my soul doth sigh. In holy Girsu, the children are in distress. Into the interior of the splendid shrine he, the invader, pressed. The august queen from her temple he brought forth. O lady of my city, desolated, when wilt thou return? We pass by the bloody Lugal-Zaggisi and other Sumerian kings of mighty name, Lugal-Shaganjur, Lugal-Kijub-Nidudu, Niniji-Dupti, Lugal-Andakunja. Meanwhile, another people of Semitic race had built the kingdom of Akkad under the leadership of Sargon I and had established capital at Akkad, some 200 miles northwest of the Sumerian city-states. A monolith found at Susa portrays Sargon armed with the dignity of a majestic beard and dressed in all the pride of long authority. His origin was not royal. History could find no father for him, and no other mother than a temple prostitute. Sumerian legend composed for him an autobiography quite mosaic in its beginning. My humble mother conceived me. In secret she brought me forth. She placed me in a basket boat of rushes. With pitch she closed my door. Rescued by a workman, he became a cupbearer to the king, grew in favor and influence, rebelled, displaced his master, and mounted the throne of Akkad. He called himself King of Universal Dominion and ruled a small portion of Mesopotamia. Historians call him the Great, for he invaded many cities, captured much booty, and killed many men. Among his victims was that same Lugal-Zaggisi, who had despoiled Lagash and violated its goddess. Him Sargon defeated and carried off to Nippur in chains. East and west, north and south, the mighty warrior marched, conquering Elam, washing his weapons in symbolic triumph in the Persian Gulf, crossing Western Asia, reaching the Mediterranean, and establishing the first great empire in history. For 55 years he held sway, while legends gathered about him and prepared to make him a god. His reign closed with all his empire in revolt. 3 sons succeeded him in turn. The third, Naram-Sin, was a mighty builder, of whose works nothing remains but a lovely stele or memorial slab recording his victory over an obscure king. This powerful relief, found by De Morgan at Susa in 1897, and now a treasure of the Louvre, shows a muscular Naram-Sin armed with bow and dart, stepping with royal dignity upon the bodies of his fallen foes, and apparently prepared to answer with quick death the appeal of the vanquished for mercy. While between them another victim, pierced through the neck with an arrow, falls dying. Behind them tower the Zagros Mountains, and on one hill is the record, an elegant uniform, of Naram-Sin's victory. Here the art of carving is already confident and adult, already guided and strengthened with a long tradition. To be burned to the ground is not always a lasting misfortune for a city. It is usually an advantage from the standpoint of architecture and sanitation. By the 26th century BC, we find Lagash flourishing again, now under another enlightened monarch, Gudea, whose stocky statues are the most prominent remains of Sumerian sculpture. The diorite figure in the Louvre shows him in a pious posture, with his head crossed by a heavy band resembling a model of the Colosseum, hands folded in his lap, bare feet and bare shoulders, and short, chubby legs, covered by a bell-like skirt, embroidered with a volume of hieroglyphics. The strong but regular features reveal a man thoughtful and just, firm and yet refined. Gudea was honored by his people not as a warrior, but as a Sumerian Aurelius, devoted to religion, literature, and good works. He built temples, promoted the study of classical antiquities in the spirit of the expeditions that unearthed him, and tempered the strength of the strong in mercy to the weak. One of his inscriptions reveals the policy for which his people worshipped him after his death as a god. During 7 years, the maidservant was the equal of her mistress. The slave walked beside his master, and in my town the weak rested by the side of the strong. Meanwhile, Ur of the Chaldees was having one of the most prosperous epochs in its long career from 3500 BC, the apparent age of its oldest graves, to 700 BC. Its greatest king, Ur-Engur, brought all Western Asia under his pacific sway, and proclaimed for all Sumeria the first extensive code of laws in history. By the laws of righteousness of Shamash forever I establish justice. As Ur grew rich by the trade that flowed through it on the Euphrates, Ur-Engur, like Pericles, beautified his city with temples and built lavishly in the subject cities of Larsa, Uruk, and Nippur. His son Dungi continued his work through a reign of 58 years and ruled so wisely that the people deified him as the god who had brought back their ancient paradise. But soon that glory faded. The warlike Elamites from the east and the rising Amorites from the west swept down upon the leisure, prosperity, and peace of Ur, captured its king, and sacked the city with primitive thoroughness. The poets of Ur sang sad chants about the rape of the statue of Ishtar, their beloved mother goddess, torn from her shrine by profane invaders. The form of these poems is unexpectedly first-personal, and the style does not please the sophisticated ear, but across the 4,000 years that separate us from the Sumerian singer, we feel the desolation of his city and his people. Me, the foe hath ravished, yea, with hands unwashed. Me his hands have ravished, made me die of terror. I am wretched, not of reverence have he. Stripped me of my robes, and clothed therein his consort, tore my jewels from me, therewith decked his daughter. Now I tread his courts, my very person sought he in the shrines. Alas, the day when to go forth I trembled, he pursued me in my temple. He made me quake with fear, there within my walls. And like a dove that fluttering percheth on a rafter, like a flitting owlet in a cavern hidden, bird-like from my shrine he chased me. From my city like a bird he chased me sighing, far behind me is my temple. So, for 200 years, which to our self-centered eyes seem but an empty moment, Elam and Amur ruled Sumeria. Then, from the north came the great Hammurabi, king of Babylon, retook from the Elamites Uruk and Isen. bided his time for 23 years, invaded Elam and captured its king, established his sway over Amor in distant Assyria, built an empire of unprecedented power, and disciplined it with a universal law. For many centuries now, until the rise of Persia, the Semites would rule the land between the rivers. Of the Sumerians, nothing more is heard. Their little chapter in the book of history was complete.